Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Ask Ira Live. Happy Friday. We're very excited to be here. There is so much to talk about. I'm cautiously very excited about this team right now. They're on a 6-game win streak. It's a great way to start off the new year. And we're actually starting off with a bit of breaking news. There were some reports yesterday that Dion Waiters is expected to undergo surgery for that ankle issue. So do we have any more updates on that?
Yeah, EmmaKate, we actually, today we're much closer to knowing for sure. As I reported yesterday, the Sun-Sentinel had found out yesterday that Dion Waiters was going to plan to move forward with the surgery. He just did not know when, did not know where. I am finding out today that the Miami Heat, sometime later today, are expected to send out a release saying the surgery will happen. They will not, however, say how long he's going to be out. That's just very typical for the Heat. Typically, this team, when a player is injured, they say a timetable to be announced later. This is the kind of surgery, though, if he has it, Dion already told us, it's an 8 to 10 month recovery period. You're talking training camp next season at the earliest. So this is the kind of thing the Heat, at least, I know it's not what Heat fans want to see or want to hear, but at least they can move forward with a clarity of knowing, okay, we know the Dion Waiters situation, we can move forward. And as we'll talk about on today's show, there have been a lot of guys stepping up. So this really has been a case, it's not just a case of, okay, we don't know who's going to be ready or who's going to play. They're pretty well set. There's never a good time for a season-ending injury. But I think this team is pretty well placed right now.
Absolutely. They've had that kind of next man up attitude the whole season. So we will continue to talk about Dion Waiters. We'll get to some questions toward the end of the show. But another guy, one of those guys who's really stepped up this season, who's just looks totally different and has become a real impact player on this team is Josh Richardson.
Yeah, and when you look at Josh and what he's done this year, this season began, the Miami Heat did not even know who their starting small forward was going to be, what direction they were going to go. All of a sudden, opening night, let's try Josh Richardson, and he's been a revelation. He's been the kind of player you look at, you know what, if you and I were to sit here right now and talk about most valuable player, best Heat player to this point, Josh would be that guy. And if you look at some of his numbers and you look at what he's done and what he's accomplished for this team to this point, you can see just about all his metrics are up. The scoring is up, the shooting is up, the three-point shooting is up. He has delivered on a level right now where he's really showing the Heat, okay, we have a go-to guy, we have a go-to wing. I mean, it's just interesting. Coming into the season, we would have said, for this Heat team to be successful, who has to thrive on the wing? Dion Waiters. And EmmaKate, yet as we just spoke about, they're losing that guy. And it just sounds strange, and I don't mean this in a bad way, and they might be in a better place. I never would have thought, if you would have told me, okay, Ira, in January, Dion Waiters has already missed 9 games with an ankle sprain, is about to undergo surgery. What's going to happen now? You and I would have a graphic up about potential lottery choices and where the draft pick might go instead. And Josh has really stepped forward for this team.
It's been great to see. And, you know, Josh Richardson, he has more of a slight build. So is he the future at power forward for the Heat?
Well, it's small forward, right. I mean, he's playing small forward right now, and the question was, everyone thought of him as a shooting guard. So you get him in these matchups. Again, even at small forward, when you have him going against LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, he is such a slight guy. In college, in Tennessee, he was a point guard. So you're talking up playing up in 2 weight classes. But you know what? The thing what Erik Spoelstra has done is he's maximized the matchups. Okay, you're bulkier than Josh? Fine. We'll use his quickness instead. And he really has found his way at that position. So if you're asking me, is Josh Richardson the prototypic NBA small forward these days? I would say no. But if you're asking me, could he be the prototypic small forward for the Miami Heat? I think he's shown that already. Erik Spoelstra, we hear the word all the time, positionless. Doesn't matter what we call him, shooting guard, point guard, small forward. Josh Richardson is a player, and he's proven to be that this season.
And so this past summer, the offseason, he signed a 4-year, $42 million extension. Is that looking to be a bargain right about now?
Oh, I mean, right now, if I'm Josh Richardson, I might even be looking at my numbers and the statistics there and sort of going, oh my God, what did I get myself into? And yet, this is who Josh is, and this is important. I spoke to him about the money, and I said, Josh, when he first signed his deal, I said, couldn't you have done better? The money's ridiculous, EmmaKate, as you know, around the NBA. Guys who are putting up Josh's kind of numbers and defensive metrics are getting $15, $16 million a year. Perfect example is this. Tyler Johnson next season is going to earn $19.5 million. Josh Richardson in a $10 million angle, element there. But again, Josh, I mean, this is why I like the guy so much. He went to me, how much more money do I need? He goes, it's $42 million. I'll be fine. And we're really seeing that right now. We're seeing it from his play. This is a guy, you asked me about position. He's content in his own skin. He's content in his own contract. He's just a happy, freewheeling, happy-go-lucky guy, and he's thriving right now because of it.
That's great. And there's also been a very big change with Josh the last couple of games. His hair.
Yes.
So he had the braids for a while, and we saw a bit of a fro. So what's going on there?
As you look through all his styles and what he's done, the one thing with Josh, and I've sort of kidded him about this, he's never changed the style while he was successful. He stayed with the braids when he was successful, went with the fro when that was fine, and then all of a sudden I show up in Toronto, we're at Air Canada Centre for shoot-around, and I see the fro is back. Now remember, they're on a 4-game winning streak. They have their best record over 500. I'm going, Josh, what are you doing? Okay. He goes out, he plays that game, he misses his first 9 shots. Well, me being the lack of professional I am, I come in the locker room after, and he'd won this game, and I go to him, Josh, what were you thinking? And he turns to me and he goes, first of all, change your tone, young man. And he's calling me young man, and that's fine. And then we laughed about it, and he said, as soon as I get home, the braids are going back in. So I think Sunday when they play the Bucks, you'll see the braids back in. So I kidded him the other day. We show up in Indiana at Bankers Life Fieldhouse, and I go, Josh, where were you? And he shoots me this look like, what? I said, Josh, I was at your hotel room at 2. I had my tools. I was ready for the braids, and you weren't there. So me and Josh might be on a little different sort of level right now when it comes to hair, as you can tell right now. But you know what? He's enjoying himself. He said he had to take out the braids because they became so unruly that his mother wouldn't appreciate the look. He said the fro, if it stays, will be shorter. But you know what? That's the essence. That's what I'm trying to get to with all of this. This is a guy who's having fun. And this locker room, because of the winning, everyone's in a really good mood also. So we will continue. And only on this show, Ask Ira Live, we will have regular updates on Josh Richardson's hair-raising situation.
Glad to hear it. That's important. All right, so let's move into some of the Ask Ira mailbag questions. We got a lot of questions. I mean, there's so much going on with this team.
Sure.
They're really fun to watch. We hope this winning streak keeps going. So Julio in Cape Coral says, Ira, it seems that the Heat play on a more consistent level without Justice Winslow and Dion Waiters. Do you think that an offseason trade of these two for a star is possible?
Well, the one thing we know now, and obviously this question came in before we got the news today about Dion's impending surgery, is no one's trading for Dion Waiters. You're talking about the first year of a 4-year, $52 million contract with no payoff. Teams want to see him healthy, and we will not see him healthy at least to the start of training camp. The Justice Winslow thing, I think, is going to be a little more difficult. You don't give up on a young player who basically has played maybe 2 seasons when you look at his injuries. But this is what Erik Spoelstra has to do. He has to look at his roster and he says, I owe it to the other guys on this roster to continue to win. I think it's going to be very interesting. I have heard that Justice will be back on Sunday against Milwaukee. The Heat right now in the middle of a 3-day break. So when he comes back, I think we'll get a better sense of how Erik is going to use him, where he's going to use him. Obviously, we won't be seeing Dion Waiters anymore. So those photos are up for posterity right there. But it's going to be really interesting because Erik Spoelstra would have had to work these 2 guys back. This is how cold fans are. People are going to me, good, Dion's out, it's easier. No, it's never easier losing talent, and Dion was that. But I am really curious. Justice Winslow, starting power forward this season to see where he winds up.
So what about the long term with these guys? Do both or either have a long-term future in Miami?
Well, I mean, here's the thing with Dion that I find so interesting. The only way you get value to trade a player is to showcase that player. So do the Heat still work Dion Waiters back in the rotation next season, or else you're not going to trade him? They're sitting on that contract. Or do you just say, hey, forget about how money is spent. We just spoke about Josh Richardson and the value contract, so that evens out. 1 Dion plus 1 Josh equals 2 average contracts, so you make that work. I'm going to be honest, I am fascinated to see how it plays out right now with Justice Winslow. Because again, here's a guy who's drafted, lottery pick number 10 in 2015, helped the Heat be within 1 game of the Eastern Conference Finals in the 2016 playoffs, when you might remember he played center in Game 7 of that series as a guy who was drafted as a shooting guard and Dwayne Wade's eventual replacement. So I'm curious, you don't give up on him, but you also can't affect the chemistry. I think it's going to be, EmmaKate, a very delicate dance between Erik Spoelstra, between Justice Winslow, and between his teammates. I think Sunday will be fascinating to watch the minutes and watch the role.
Absolutely. All right, and now moving on to another player. Joe from Jupiter says, I was watching the Toronto game. My only thought on Bam Adebayo was, wow, it was a transcendent performance. What did you say?
Look, his energy that night when everyone else was injured or tired, and then James Johnson, we'll get to in a little, was ejected from that game. They were so shorthanded. This is when you realize the value of youth and what a player like Bam can do. He was a whirling dervish. He was all over the place. And then something happened in the game that was fascinating. For really the first time this season, he was played alongside Hassan Whiteside. And they flourished in that game. You could see the length that Bam provides you, the shot blocking, the rebounding, just the sort of energy he has going. So all of a sudden, both guys are from North Carolina. I just posted this story at sunsentinel.com. And Hassan goes, we've got to get a nickname. We're a thing now. So Bam comes up with pork and beans. You know, the famous dish down there in North Carolina, a cassoulet, I found out. I have no idea what that means. So he says, we're going with that nickname. Heat fans, I love Bam. I enjoy Hassan, but I think it's up to Heat fans out there to come up with a better nickname than pork and beans for Bam and Hassan. But more than anything, this works. In a league that keeps shrinking, you and I have spoken about small ball for weeks here, how you're playing smaller, you're using James Johnson, even Josh Richardson, as you mentioned, a power forward a little bit, that all of a sudden you can play two bigs and they can thrive. Anyone who questioned Bam Adebayo at number 14 in the draft last June, I think now is going, wow, that Pat Riley, Chet Kamara, and his staff, they know. And I think it was an inspired choice.
Of course. Pat Riley knows what he's doing. What about that?
Shocking.
All right, so there's some social media conjecture out there that Bam could be possibly forcing Hassan out, but I think you just proved that they're working well together.
And that's the thing is, Heat fans' patience level is unbelievable. One loss, one bad game. Yes, Hassan Whiteside has not been the absolute force we've seen in previous seasons. But you know what? In these last two games, Toronto and Indiana, Hassan has had 15 rebounds in each game. He's had 6 total blocks over the 2 games. That's all you need. Again, this is the ensemble Miami Heat. This team will not have an all-star. This team has a roster where no player has ever made the all-star team from this roster. So if you're saying, who's the Heat star? It's really strange, EmmaKate. The answer that Eric Spoelstra wants you to say is, no one is. They're all equal. The box score in Toronto, 8 players played, 7 players scored in double figures. That's the essence of what this team wants to be.
Yeah, and I think it's fun to watch like that because you never know who's going to step up, and I think it also gives the motivation to be that guy on a given night.
Yes, it does. The only problem is for all the parents out there watching, when you're saying, what jersey should I buy for my kid for the best Heat player? You're going to have to vote on that on your own. Yeah.
Very true. All right, next question. Nick from Coral Springs says, Ira, from some footage shown of Rodney McGruder getting some shooting reps at practice, it's noticeable that he has vastly improved his shooting stroke and has even put on some muscle mass. Do you see him starting at shooting guard alongside Richardson? Tyler Johnson has played well, but he is a great bench player, and I'm of the belief that Justice Winslow would be best suited as our backup point guard.
And that's the thing. You see all the possibilities of this roster. So we spoke about Dion Waiters not being there. What are they going to do? They have been fine these last 9 games. And now Rodney McGruder's coming back. Rodney will be back, I think, no later than the All-Star break, 3rd week of February, probably sooner. This is an energy guy. This is a hustle guy. This is a guy you don't have to call a single play for, and he will give you defense. He will give you corner 3-point shooting. He will give you effort. He fits in. He's like the universal donor. He's like the blood type that will transfuse any team. That's what Rodney is. They will be fine with him. Will he start again at small forward? Yeah, I think there's a chance. It makes sense. Like the Ask Ira questioner said, then you can move Josh Richardson to shooting guard after we just explained why he could be a small forward also, or even a power forward. Flexibility, it works for you. It'll reduce the minutes on the other guys. I think this will be the kind of boost. You say to yourself, okay, February's the trading deadline. The Heat have to make a deal. What's going to make them stronger? You know, EmmaKate, what might make them stronger is the injury list. That if Rodney McGruder returns from the injured list, that's their trade acquisition. That's their bonus guy. That's their +1. To have a winning record, to be on a 6-game winning streak, to be 7 games over 500, and then have a quality starter coming back, I think that's the kind of boost that could only benefit this team.
Absolutely. So continue to submit those questions at sunsentinel.com or on our YouTube page, and we will get to some more at the end. Probably get a little more Dion Waiters talk as well. But for now, let's do like we've been doing every week, looking back at some of the best of Heat history. So, Ira, today, can you talk about your all-time top 10 centers?
Yeah, we've been doing this every week for people who know out there. This is the Heat's 30th anniversary season, 3 decades of the teams, all the ups, all the downs, and some fascinating names coming through along the way. And I think today's list is sort of the quintessential list for the Heat, because it began with Ronnie Cycli, it continued with Alonzo Mourning, then Shaquille O'Neal, now Hassan Whiteside. This team has always favored big men, and there have been a bunch of favorite big men. So we will, to keep the drama going here, start at number 10 and work backwards. So number 10, I have Jermaine O'Neal. He came over from that trade when the Heat were between Sean Marion, Shaquille O'Neal, got him into the playoffs, into a Game 7 against Atlanta, and then went down with a migraine headache. But he had a solid season. Joel Anthony, sort of the guy who's with the Heat for several seasons, knew his place, would rebound, would block shots, would be a supporting player, was there for the start of the Big Three era. And Ike Austin, this is a guy who came over from the Utah Jazz. The Heat signed him off the waiver wire. Like so many Heat players, he came in, I don't want to say grotesquely overweight, because I've been there too, but he came in overweight, dropped a ton of pounds for the Heat, had a season where he got noticed as a top reserve, as a top sixth man coming in off the bench at the middle behind Alonzo Mourning. So right there we see sort of three contributing type guys who really made a difference.
And Anthony is kind of funny. He's part of that Canadian lineage of big men that we have with Jamal McGruder and now Kelly Olynyk. And Anthony, he was with the Heat for 9 seasons. And
you forget about the longevity, you forget about the tenure. Here's what's fascinating also is, and this shows you how everything that comes around sort of, belongs together. Joel Anthony was also a member of the Canadian national team. He's a Montrealer, born in Montreal. He helped teach Kelly Olynyk on the national team, and he brought him up through the Canadian national program. And I talked to Kelly Olynyk the other day in Toronto about being back in Canada, whether he would play for the national team, and he was glowing. And he was going, JoJo, he's the ultimate pro. And here's sort of a fascinating fact. Joel Anthony right now is out of the NBA. Because of that, the Canadian national team needed a veteran. Here's a guy who's made millions of dollars. Like you said, was with the Heat almost for a decade. He is playing with these teenagers now on the Canadian national team to sort of teach them and help them through playing in actual qualifying games while he's out of the NBA. He's just a really good guy, and personally, I believe the best French speaker ever in the Heat locker room. Joel Anthony, quality human being. Of course, all the Canadian guys around here have been that way. We go on further on our list with our next 3, starting at number 7. I have Kevin Willis there. He's a fascinating study because statistically, if you look at his numbers with the Heat, you would tell me, Ira, why isn't he higher on this list? But he was also a statistics chaser. He would go for every rebound. He would sometimes go out of the defensive precepts to the point where I believe it just drove the Heat coaching staff crazy and they moved on from him. One of the NBA's all-time greats, with the Heat a little uneven. Chris Birdman Anderson. Well, we know the tattoos, we know the mohawk, we know the whole look, but the energy he delivered to the Heat to win one NBA championship, make it back to another NBA Finals, he deserves his place just because of his effort. And Brian Grant, what an inspirational story. Alonzo Mourning goes down with his kidney illness. Brian Grant steps up, plays center. And even right now, Brian Grant remains inspirational. He's dealing with Parkinson's. He started a foundation. He has annual fundraisers, and all the Heat people, the Heat front office, they go there and support him. Just a really good guy. And if you go online and you just look for Brian Grant and Parkinson's, and if you can make a donation, he gave so much to this community. I think we all have to keep him in our thoughts.
Absolutely. And, Grant was a little bit undersized, but he was part of those, the grittiest Heat rosters in the early 2000s. And like you said, he stepped in for Alonzo Mourning when he was sidelined. And I have a feeling maybe we'll see Alonzo Mourning a little later on this list.
Yeah, Zoe will be on this list also. And you look at Brian Grant here in these photos, and again, don't ever tell Brian Grant he was undersized. He would absolutely go in there. He would battle with anyone. He was one of the Heat's initial prime free agent signings under Pat Riley. They did a sign and trade to get him here. He loved being here. He wanted more. This was the transition era for the Heat between those great New York Knicks playoff series and then the Shaquille O'Neal era. And Brian Grant was included in that trade. And you realized when you gave him up, think of the players who went in that trade. Caron Butler, Lamar Odom, Brian Grant, how much they meant for the Heat. Sometimes I call these guys a bridge player, not because of cards, but because of eras that they bridge between for the Heat. That's what Brian Grant was. Unfairly, he didn't get to be part of the major Knicks playoff series. He wasn't here in 2006 when the Heat won the franchise's first championship. But without him, just because of the value he brought in the Shaquille O'Neal trade, you realize how important he was to this franchise. As a person, would be even higher on my list. Then we move on here to the next, almost getting to the lead name, but I think you gave it away. You ruined it there, EmmaKate.
I don't know. I don't know who's coming. I just guessed.
All right. Then we go to the next three. Ronnie Cycli, the first Heat center, the first college draft choice out of Syracuse, came in here, a rebounding machine. He's still the Heat all-time leader for single-game rebounds, and I still remember in a game against the Washington, I believe they were still the Washington Bullets then, he was almost up to 40 rebounds in the game when it was lopsided and Kevin Lockery pulled him out. And to this day, if you see Ronnie Cycli, he's a DJ now, still spends a lot of time on South Beach. You can ask him about that game, and he's still angry that he never got to his 40 rebounds. And here's the nice thing about Ronnie. Every time that Hassan Whiteside breaks one of his record, Ronnie will go on Twitter and he'll congratulate him. So he really has maintained his closeness with his team. Number 3, Hassan Whiteside. We've talked about him, such a revelation. In the Heat's perfect world, Hassan Whiteside could still ascend on this list when we do our Heat 35th anniversary or 40th anniversary. They want more from him. He's plateaued a little. It'll be interesting. And then here's the toughest decision I had. Before we get to number 1, how can Shaquille O'Neal, a man who's had his number retired by the Heat, had his number retired by the Los Angeles Lakers, is an all-time champion, a Hall of Famer, not be on the top of his list? To me, I go with extended tenure and where he stands. So Shaq, believe me, what he did, I remember we spoke about this before. He came down Biscayne Boulevard on that big semi-trailer when he arrived. The Diesel was in town. It was a transcendent moment, but not the ultimate moment, which we'll get to there in a second.
Mm-hmm. So going back to Cycli, he was a native of Lebanon, grew up in Greece.
Yes.
So he was just, a really good ambassador for the game.
Yeah, you know what? When you say to yourself, okay, the international city of Miami is getting its first franchise. How do we make this team appeal to everyone, to be cosmopolitan? That's what Ronnie was. As a matter of fact, you're talking about a guy right now on Sirius XM has his own DJ channel. I mean, that's who he is. This guy was so much more than basketball. This guy who had a place in the community here. This is a guy who, coming from the Big East and Syracuse, brought all the Northeastern basketball fans down here. They never got further than the first round of the playoffs while he was here. But for a guy who set the table, I believe at some point they should retire his number as well because of what he did. Those were tough years. EmmaKate, 15-67 the first season. Who shows up to work every day dealing with a record like that? Ronnie Cycli did. He hit the boards. He had his little spinorama moves. His nickname was, which is ironic with the DJ history, his nickname back then, before that started, was the Spin Doctor, simply because of his moves on the court. So he knew where he was going next. So he's a guy, Heat fans, when you talk about great centers, don't forget his name. He's deserving in that lineage.
Absolutely.
And
number 1?
Which number? And this, okay, well, we mentioned it already. We know where we're going. I've gotten a bunch of questions when this first photo gallery appeared at sunsentinel.com. How can you put Alonzo Mourning ahead of Shaquille O'Neal? Because basically they were on that 2006 Heat championship team. Shaquille O'Neal was the starting center. Alonzo came off the bench. Folks, it's more than that. It's about those Knicks series. It's about Jeff Van Gundy hanging from his leg in Madison Square Garden, putting up the fight against the Knicks, showing those guns he has right there and who he is. And he still has those guns right now, even as a Heat executive. What he did for this franchise, and then the kidney illness, and to miss the start of the season in 2000 after returning from the Olympics, come back for the playoffs, leave the Heat as a free agent, but return for the 2006 championship with a huge game, the best Heat center on the floor when they won in Dallas that year, and then the work he's done since. Kidney transplant, come back, play NBA basketball, his charitable work, the Overtown Youth Center, that he still funds to this day and is a regular presence there. To me, these top 10 lists should be as much about the history of the team as the play on the court. And I think Alonzo Mourning, he's right up there with me with Dan Marino and the great ambassadors of South Florida sports, Don Shula, Bob Greasy, guys like that. I don't see how you can put him anywhere but on a number 1 on a top 10 list of all-time great Heat centers.
Absolutely. And until Dwayne Wade came along, it looked like Mourning would have been, the face
he
of
would
the
have been the guy. Yeah, I mean, when you said who's the greatest Heat player ever, and to a degree, it ended so much better with Zoe being here than with Dwayne being away in Chicago and in Cleveland, that I think there'll be more of a warmth all the time for Zoe, who I was incredibly afraid of at one time when I was covering this team. True story, and he used to literally go to us. I would turn off that microphone. So I turn off my handheld old cassette tape recorders, and I got admonished. And if nothing else, now being a married man, whenever I have a tough day with my wife or something like that, I could say, hey, it could be worse. It could be Big Zoe in the locker room instead. I was younger then, I had hair then, and I was terrified. The man was imposing then, and I'm still a little bit scared.
Thanks so much for those. It's always so fun to look back and really appreciate the great history.
And again,
that this team
folks,
has.
I've been here for all 30 years, but I started when I was 12. So let's have
Exactly.
perspective there. Okay.
There we go. All right, let's take a moment to look ahead now at
Sure.
the upcoming slate of games. So what's looking interesting to you?
Well, you know, it's rare that you get the same team in the same week like the Heat are going to have this coming week. They're on this current 3-day break. They have the Milwaukee Bucks American Airlines Arena coming up on Sunday at 1 o'clock before they leave immediately for the start of a 5-game trip. And the second game on that trip is in Milwaukee on Wednesday, where we'll do our next Ask Ira Live from, hopefully if Skype works. And these games are double games. Eric Spoelstra said before they played the Knicks, before they played the other teams in the playoff race, these games count double. That tiebreakers will matter. And EmmaKate, think back to last season. The Heat finished tied for the last playoff spot with the Chicago Bulls. What was the tiebreaker? Head-to-head record. The Bulls won that series 2-1. So again, this year against Milwaukee, these games could matter at the end. They're very close in the playoffs. And when I look at the Bucks, I say to myself, they have one thing the Heat don't have. Okay, this is the test, so you got to be ready. They have an all-star. He's been leading the NBA in all-star voting in the East. The latest results came in second, but that's going to be the biggest challenge. And the biggest challenge for the Heat, EmmaKate, will be
Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Antetokounmpo. Very good.
Did I
So
get it?
you didn't have to, you nailed it. You didn't have to go for Greek freak. What this guy has done, he is a 7-foot point guard. He has remarkable length, and that to me is what's going to be interesting. When the Heat play the Bucks on Sunday and on Wednesday, Milwaukee will have the best player on the court. But that's happened so often this season, and the Heat have schemed around that. I am really curious to see who winds up on Giannis Antetokounmpo, whether it's James Johnson and his length, whether they put a sign on him to try to get longer arms on him, or maybe even, and going back to a name we talked about before, I would be fascinated to see Bam Adebayo going against, I'll say it easier this time, the Greek Freak. Because when you look at the energy that Bam can provide against Giannis, I think that could be a matchup that could work for the Heat. So again, Sunday and Wednesday. Home Sunday, road Wednesday against the Bucks. I think it's going to be a fascinating matchup. The games count double. It's like those double points you get, with your credit card sometimes also, although this time you can spend them anywhere at the game. I think these two Bucks games will tell a lot about where the Heat might get seeded in the East. At the start of the season, I thought the Heat would definitely, I'm going to be honest, finish behind the Bucks. They're ahead of them right now in the standings. Win these two games, they stay ahead of them.
All right, we'll have to see what happens. So let's move to some more of your questions. We've got a lot of people asking a lot about Dion Waiters.
I can imagine.
All right, so Keith says, with the Heat winning 13 of 17 without Dion Waiters, was it a mistake to sign him to a big contract at a position the Heat has plenty of players at?
EmmaKate, I am getting so much hindsight. I mean, everyone is a great hindsight GM.
Yes.
The old, if we knew then what we know now. Here's the question we're going to have to study in coming weeks as Dion has his surgery and the Heat move forward without him. How much medically did the Heat know? Did the Heat take a chance on a player that they knew might not be right this season? So what I'm doing is this. You're talking about a 4-year, $52 million contract. Let's be honest, they got almost no value out of it. So you have to say to yourself, did the Heat know this might be possible? And if they did know this might be possible, did they say to themselves that Dion was good enough to get a 3-year, $52 million contract that, hey, 17-18 might be a wash, we're going to have him for 3 more years. So to me, this is going to come down to the medical staff, their rehabilitation staff, but they have to make something out of him. Whether it's to play him and work him back in the rotation, or whether it's a case of, hey, we have to get him value again and maybe for a trade. So I think that's what's going to be interesting. But again, don't give up on an asset. Dion Waiters last season, I wish we were doing the show back then when they finished 30-11 over the second half of the season. He missed the final 13 games, but otherwise he was a contributor. So I think we have to back off. An injury, you don't feel another man's pain. Dion did not want to have the surgery. He wanted to play this year, and he realized he couldn't. I think the surgery is the best answer for both parties involved, but I wouldn't necessarily write off Dion Waiters' Heat career at this point.
It's so easy to do that, too, to look back and
say, oh, how could the Heat not know he's
this.
injured?
Yeah.
And again, think about it if you're in Dion Waiters' shoes. If you have a chance to sign a 4-year, $52 million contract as a player coming off a good season or as a player coming off a surgery, who's going to have the surgery? He did right by him. It was up to the Heat. They had all his medical records to know, and this wound up to be the happenstance.
All right, one more Dion Waiters question. So with Waiters now likely sidelined for the remainder of the season, is this roster pretty much set with just incorporating Winslow, McGruder, and White when each is available to return? Given the current win streak and there being no whales to trade for, should the Heat just continue to ride this group out, which, as you speculate, may be good enough to get to a second round of the playoffs?
And that's the thing, EmmaKate. What's the ultimate upside of this roster? And where is Pat Riley at this point in his career? Pat Riley has always said the Miami Heat are a championship franchise, and that's how we're going to play. This roster right now, I look at the East, except for the Cavaliers. I believe they can beat any team or compete with any team in a first-round series. But is Pat Riley playing for the second round of the playoffs? Has it changed that much that that's good enough for him right now? So I think by February 8th, and we'll be all on top of that as we get closer, I think he still will look for a big move. I think he realizes right now he has a second-round playoff team. Pat Riley's here for championships. I think another move very much could be forthcoming.
All right. So we mentioned this earlier in the show.
Sure.
James Johnson had a bit of a scuffle in Toronto. So what happened to James Johnson will happen and will happen again. He's an enforcer. Enforcers are what they are, but he will probably think twice, but it's a reaction.
Yeah, and that question from Douglas I got, and I answered online at sunsentinel.com also. I agree. James Johnson was trained in mixed martial arts. His father was involved also. He's never lost a fight. When he got involved in that scuffle with Serge Ibaka, I was not thinking to myself, number one, oh, James Johnson's going to get suspended. There's going to be a fine. I was going, I hope Serge Ibaka survives. Because James Johnson, when he gets angry, you get out of his way. Look, this is who the guy is. He plays with an intensity, with a fury. But just like in MMA and the UFC, there are rules to play by. James issued an apology on social media, said he understands that he let his teammates down and it won't happen again. So you know what? It was the best of all outcomes. He learned a lesson, of course at the cost of about $100,000 in pay. The Heat wound up getting a victory anyway in Toronto that night and in Indiana the next night. And I think they're now going to have a forward much more under control who understands he can't let his teammates down anymore. I think when you see James Johnson return to the court Sunday against Milwaukee, that on this trip, he's going to really feel an obligation to contribute to make it up to his teammates. Again, if they would have lost in Toronto, if they would have lost in Indy, you could say he let his teammates down. They came through for him. I think next he comes through for them.
Mm-hmm. Now we have a Bucks question, Bucks-related question.
Go wrong on that.
Ira, do you think Chris Middleton is a viable option for the Heat via trade? The Bucks want a center that can protect the rim, and the Heat need a wing that can shoot, score, and defend. A swap makes a lot of sense. Thoughts?
I like Chris Middleton a lot. He had the injury last year, missed half a season. Ironically, came back against the Heat in his first game back. Milwaukee has been looking for a center. They've checked and seen if possibly DeAndre Jordan is available. They've considered Andrew Bogut, who was with them previously, a draft choice, and even Tyson Chandler. I don't know if they want to pick up a salary like Hassan Whiteside. That's why they traded Greg Monroe and got out of his money. Milwaukee had some intriguing pieces, Jabari Parker coming back also. But here's the whole thing. When people are asking me about Dion Waiters, and that he can get a $5.5 million exception for replacement player for this season, would that player play? In other words, EmmaKate, I think you have to say to yourself this. You have Josh Richardson. You have Tyler Johnson. You have Goran Dragic. You have Wayne Ellington. We mentioned Rodney McGruder coming back. Where would such a player play? Unless a player, and Chris Middleton might be an exception, but just bringing in another player, I'm not so sure that Eric Spoelstra doesn't say, I'm happy with what I have right now. I want to go out there and explore Tyler Johnson. Maybe he plays well. I can trade out of that $19 million salary. So if you're saying that Chris Middleton's available, yeah, I like him a lot. But any lesser player as a wing, I think the Heat feel really good about their wing rotation.
And there just aren't enough minutes, really, for the number of
and
players.
That's the thing. So do you want to annoy Richardson and Tyler Johnson and Goran and Ellington and McGruder by telling them, hey, new guys in town, he hasn't fought the fight with you guys through last season, fought the fight through the start of this season, but he's stepping in. Chemistry is a very delicate thing. For the right player, like we said with Brian Grant, Caron Butler, and Lamar Odom, you trade to get a Shaquille O'Neal. You trade to get a player who makes your team like Goran Dragic that much better. So I would say this. It would have to be a top-tier wing player for the Heat to consider such a move.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have time for a few more questions. So Sam asks, what's your take on Wayne Ellington for the Sixth Man Award?
Well, we're going to get this into next week's show also, because what Wayne Ellington has done has been remarkable. I think there are other guys coming off the bench when Lou Williams was, and even Jamal Crawford, who might have done a little more. I'm almost wondering, can a player in his 10th year be most improved? And could that perhaps be the award that he wins instead? I think what Wayne has done has been a revelation this year. But I got to tell you, when you and I sit down after the show and we do our weekly power rankings of top Heat players, I'm not so sure that I don't have Wayne Ellington in the top 3 right now for what he's done. He has been, if there was an award, most surprising player of the season, it would be Wayne Ellington. Think about it. Toronto, game-winning layup. Indiana, shot clock running down. Heat up by 3, about 30 seconds to go. From 28 feet, why not? I'll throw this high-arcing three-pointer. It'll bound off the rim. Oh, and it'll go in as well. Wayne Ellington is living the charmed life I think we all want to know. Wayne Ellington will be filling out my lottery numbers this weekend.
All right, Andrew from Coral Gables says Kelly Olynyk is what the Heat thought they were getting in Josh McRoberts.
Yes, it's good to be an active, ball-moving, aggressive, creative big man, but it's better to be ambulatory. That's the difference. The Heat thought they had this in Josh, the foot injuries and the leg injuries and being unable to play. So remarkably, the Heat keep the hair game with Kelly, man bun, going with a headband or whatever, that wind up fine. It's just so much of this league, EmmaKate, is about getting to the court. Dion Waiters, what could he do for the Heat? We didn't know the end of last season. We don't know this season. Sometimes just being able to be there is the first step. That's what Kelly has done. I think Josh McRoberts could have done a lot of this, but Josh McRoberts couldn't get to the court.
Mm-hmm. So that's all the questions we have for today. Is there anything else, any other topics we need to cover?
I think this will really be an evolving week. I think when we get a chance and talk next week, I think the whole Dion Waiters thing will be settled a little more. I want to get more into Wayne Ellington and what he's done this season because I think he's become maybe the story of the Heat season. So it'll be interesting over the weekend to see what happens. Milwaukee on Sunday, afternoon game. Martin Luther King, afternoon game in Chicago on Monday. We'll have a little better sense of where the Heat stand, but everything right now looks like it's trending in the right direction unless your name is Dion Waiters.
Yeah. All right. Keep sending those questions to us at sunsentinel.com or email Ira here. And we're so excited to see what happens this weekend to watch the Heat and Giannis Antetokounmpo.
How about that? I only gave her like 3 days to practice. Greek freak.
I want to get it in as many times as I can and just brag about it now. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you again next week.